All right, so now I'm going to talk about vision, and this will be the last section for the nervous system lecture. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the eye. So we draw an eyeball, and again, I apologize, I'm a terrible artist. We have this region in the front of the eye, known as the cornea. And in the back of the eye, we have the optic nerve. And that cornea is a thin, transparent membrane, and that's going to start our pathway of vision. So light is going to travel through the cornea, and it's going to enter into this anterior cavity. So I'm going to start making a list of the pathway so that you guys have it here for your notes. So step one, it's going to go through the cornea, which is a thin, transparent membrane. And step two, it's going to enter into the anterior cavity, which is between the cornea and lens, and is filled with a fluid known as aqueous humor. Now there's several parts to, or several different layers to the eye itself. The outermost layer is known as the sclera, and that layer is the white of the eye. So the sclera is the white part of the eye. Underneath the sclera, we have the choroid plexus, and that's going to provide the blood supply to the eye. And then starting in the back of the eye, like in the middle, covering the back of the eye, we have the third layer of the eye, which is known as the retina. In the middle of the eye, we have the lens, which is supported by a muscle known as the ciliary muscle. So light's going to pass through here, but we have one other division of the anterior cavity, the colored part of the eye. So the colored part of the eye is known as the iris, and I'm going to give this person blue eyes. So my boys have blue eyes. And we go from there. So we have intrinsic and extrinsic eye muscles. Extrinsic eye muscles move the eye, and those are controlled by those cranial nerves that we went through that talked about like eye movement, like abducens abducts the eye. So we can move our eyeball around in the eye socket. But then we have our intrinsic eye muscles. And those include the iris, which is the colored part of the eye, and that's going to control the size of the pupil. And we have the ciliary muscle, which shapes the lens. So continuing on with our pathway, light travels through the cornea, which is that thin transparent membrane, and enters into the anterior cavity. We have two separate parts to the anterior cavity. Which is the anterior chamber that lies between the cornea to the pupil. And then we have the pupil. And then we enter into that posterior chamber, which is from the pupil to lens. The pupil is kind of that dark opening that's in the inside of the iris. So all we've basically done is gone through this region here. So anterior chamber is from cornea to pupil. Pupil to lens is the posterior chamber, but this entire thing is filled with aqueous fluid. And the pupil is here in the center of the iris, and it's really an opening. So the pupil is a hole. Why does the pupil look black in color? Well, when we shine light into the eye, all of that light is captured by the retina. So nothing reflects back because we are sensing those with photoreceptors. So that's why it kind of appears black. If you've ever seen that red eye effect where someone takes a picture of someone and it flashes red and the pupils look red, that's a reflection of the blood vessels in the eyes of that choroid plexus. So anyways, we're continuing on our pathway of vision here. And the next step along the way is the lens. And the lens is shaped to focus an image on the retina. So the ciliary muscle will shape the lens in order to focus the image on the retina. And it will make it more steep or less steep in order to look at things that are closer or farther away. Now the light is going to go through the lens here, and as it travels through to the retina, it goes through this posterior cavity. So that's the next step along our pathway, the posterior cavity. And this is filled with vitreous humor. After the posterior cavity, it hits the retina. And the retina has several layers to it. So light goes all the way through to the back of the retina, and then it comes back forward and goes down into the optic nerve. So the photoreceptors are on the back of the retina, then the next layer are the bipolar cells, and the next layer are the ganglion, and that's going to synapse into the optic nerve. So the first part it hits is the photoreceptors. And these include rods, which sense the grayscale and brightness, and cones, which sense color. Then the bipolar cells, which are really only in the eye. The ganglion cells. And then we're going to hit that optic nerve. From the optic nerve, we cross over to the optic chiasma, optic tract, to eventually the occipital lobe for the interpretation of vision. So, again, we hit the back of the retina, the photoreceptors, bipolar cells, ganglion cells, and then those are going to lead into that optic nerve. Some additional definitions here. Palpebrae are your eyelids. Cataracts, that's a cloudiness of the lens. So if we look at where the lens is, this lens is a marble-like structure. And there's proteins in here that are perfectly aligned so that they're parallel, so that light can pass right through them. But if we happen to have these proteins fall over, that can lead to cloudiness of the lens. This happens in old age. This can also happen upon death, so energy is required to keep these proteins in alignment, but if the person dies, then those proteins can fall over. Smoking, so different chemicals from cigarettes and being exposed to chemicals and smoke and that type of stuff can cause those to fall over, and even diabetes. Sugar accumulation in here can cause these proteins to fall over, and that can lead to the development of cataracts. Conjunctivitis is an eye infection. Presbyopia is, just to kind of reiterate what conjunctiva are. Conjunctiva is the connective tissue covering of the inside of the eyelids and the outside of the eye. So when we say conjunctivitis, we're talking about inflammation of the conjunctiva, or that membrane that surrounds the inside of the eyelids and the outer eye. Presbyopia is a loss of vision with aging, kind of like presbycusis is a loss of hearing with aging. Glaucoma is an accumulation of aqueous humor, which compresses the retina and leads to blurry vision. There's different medications that people can take with glaucoma. Myopia is nearsightedness. Hyperopia is farsightedness. And astigmatism is an uneven cornea, which leads to blurry vision. With myopia, if you want to have LASIK surgery to correct that, the laser would peel off the top flap of the cornea. So the laser would come in here and just peel off the top layer. And then the laser would try to flatten the cornea. With hyperopia, again, you'd peel off that top layer of the cornea and the laser would try to steepen the cornea. With astigmatism, the laser would try to smooth out the cornea to make the vision improve. And then we have trachoma. Trachoma is actually a chlamydia infection of the eye that leads to blindness. This isn't your run-of-the-mill STD chlamydia that we have here in the United States. This is a specific strain of chlamydia that's found in different parts of Africa, predominantly like Western Africa, and it's transmitted by flies. So the flies land on an infected eye with that chlamydia strain, and then the fly lands on a person's eye, and that chlamydia gets deposited, and the type of chlamydia causes curling of the eyelids so that the eyelids curl under, and then just by blinking, that's going to cause the eyelashes to scratch the cornea, and that can lead to permanent damage and blindness. So especially in babies who don't know to like fan eyes away or flies away from their eyes. So this is a huge kind of public health issue over in certain parts of Africa. But there are cases that pop up here in the United States as well.